what's up? We're out here on a completely new river in Indiana, and I want to talk a little bit about something I think is going to save you a little bit of time and effort when you're getting ready to hit new places like I am right now. Completely new water, you're not exactly sure what you're going to encounter, so I'm going to give you my 4 rod combos that I take with me basically everywhere to cover all of my bases. But before I get to that, this looks good, so I gotta fish it. There we go. Oh, all right, that's a small guy. All right, there's a little guy. We're in a really nice looking area with all these boulders, but I think we're gonna have to find a little more depth to find some bigger fish. All right, so since I am out here throwing a whopper plopper to start as my search bait, I might as well go over my setup that I use for topwater in general, especially when it's a topwater treble hook bait. So what I've got today is a Daiwa Tatula. This is actually a medium heavy, moderate action rod. It has a little more bend. I do like a little more of a parabolic action when I'm throwing a bait like a plopper because it has those treble hooks. That bend keeps those trebles buried in the fish's mouth as you're fighting them. If you've watched a lot of my recent videos, I've been throwing it on a medium heavy Bass X, which is really not my preferred choice at all. It's just because I had a rod like this that was out of commission due to an eyelet being broke. So I just bought a new rod entirely while I'm waiting for that to get repaired. And this is gonna be just a 7-foot medium heavy, moderate action rod. And the reel, I think, is the most important thing when it comes to fishing topwater, because smallmouth especially have a tendency to run so darn fast when you catch them, and I want to be able to catch up to them, frankly. There's been a lot of times with slower reels where I'm getting burned because they're coming at me and I'm not able to keep up, so there's no tension on the line. They jump, they throw the hook. So I've got an 8.5-to-1 ratio reel. This is a Shimano Curado DC. It doesn't have to be this one. I'm just recommending that if you want to have a dedicated kind of topwater crankbait treble hook setup for search baits, you want something a little quicker so you can catch up to river smallmouth. I don't think you can ever really crank it too fast in the river, especially in the warmer months like this. I'm in September. These fish are willing and ready to chase. They're feeding up before winter time. So I like burning things fast. I like making them come out and chase things, but I also want to catch up to them when they do. All right, so the next setup that I am always taking with me is going to be one of my favorite rods, especially for a hard jerk bait, and that is going to be a 610 medium fast. The reel that I've got that paired up with is an Abu Garcia Zata. This is one of my favorite spinning reels. It's a little more money than I'd like to spend on a spinning reel, but honestly, in this case, I think the quality warrants the price. It is one of my favorites. I really love it. It's very smooth, and it's very good for keeping up with the jerk bait as you're jerking it and reeling. But more than anything, this is just really comfortable. It's got a really nice smooth drag. But this action rod is one that I'm always gonna bring because it's so versatile, like a lot of my other rods. I'm a little bit different than most guys. I don't wanna throw jerk baits on a casting setup. I wanna throw them on a spinning setup. So this is where I do the large majority of that. And in areas where I can't fish a hard jerk bait, this is gonna be my go-to rod for wacky rigs, both weightless and weighted. This rod is very sensitive. It has a great parabolic bend, but it does have enough backbone to horse fish out. I'm primarily throwing like a jerkbait or a wacky rig or the Collins Special in areas where there's not a ton of cover, so I'm really not fighting fish in really heavy wood or anything with this rod. I'm actually throwing a lot in open water or along cut bank, places like that where I know fish aren't really gonna get tangled up in a lot, so I don't need a ton of backbone. This rod does have a pretty good amount of backbone, but again, I'm throwing it in open water, and I'm really using it because I wanted to keep the fish pinned with that nice bend, just solid, constant pressure. So this is a really important staple when I go out on any river, pretty much at any time of the year. Little hog sucker. All right, and this video just would not be complete without mentioning a setup that is a little heavier. So I always have to bring a 7-foot medium heavy fast rod. and a normal speed 7:3-to-1 gear ratio reel. This is gonna allow me to fish a lot of different things, but I do primarily throw swim baits, dark sleepers, swim jigs on this setup. Personally, I do want something that's a little heavier with me all of the time, because you never know when you're gonna wanna throw something just a little bigger. So if you really need to, you could throw some like smaller glide baits on it. You could throw some smaller swim baits on it, like a 6-inch trace, like a 5-inch. You could also throw like underspins. And this is gonna be a rod that I fish both in heavier cover and kind of open water with rock cover. I really like a little bit heavier rod when I'm fishing around rock and I'm fishing on the bottom, so I can really lay into them when I get a fish. It's not like I feel like they're gonna go down and get wrapped up or anything. But for some reason, I just like a little more backbone. One of my all-time favorite rods, especially for the price point for this kind of setup, is just the Daiwa Tatula. Obviously, I've been talking about this. Clearly, I really like this rod series. I think it's good value for the money. You don't want to buy something super expensive. But again, I'm not here to try to sell you a specific rod. I mostly just want you to think about what kind of setups am I bringing with me so that I can cover as many bases as possible when I'm out on the water. This setup for me personally, anything that's gonna be an open hook swim bait, a swim jig, a dark sleeper, something that I wanna kind of bounce off the bottom but I'm reeling steadily, I'm gonna throw that on my medium heavy. I like a 7-footer for this. If you wanna go a little longer, I think this is where you probably could, because you want a rod that's gonna be a little more versatile in throwing heavier stuff, because it's certainly not gonna hurt to have a rod that can handle a little bit heavier baits depending on where you are. You never know what you're gonna need to adapt to out there, so you do definitely wanna bring a medium heavy setup. That is just a non-negotiable for me. I might throw a medium heavy setup more than any other rod type, to be honest. Another good alternative to the Daiwa Tatula is one of the older St. Croix Bass X. There's a 7-foot medium heavy fast that I have that I love throwing a bunch of stuff on, all of the baits that I just said, and you can even really get away with throwing a whopper plopper if you need to. This season I've kind of been doing that. I don't really recommend it for topwater baits, especially with braid, but it does do the job. It has great backbone. It horses fish out of deep cover. I really throw it in pretty much every situation. Lake Michigan, all sorts of bigger and smaller rivers. It's definitely one of my favorite rods. As far as this reel setup, I have another Shimano Curado DC. This one is a little bit slower than my topwater reel, and I like it that way because I don't really want to be burning swim baits most of the time. Usually I'm kind of bouncing them off the bottom. So this is just a 7.4-to-1 gear ratio reel. Look how fast that fish ran. Ridiculous. It's just a small guy, but man. All right, well, let's talk about my soft jerkbait setup, and I'll also use this for hard jerkbaits when it's appropriate. But right now I have a St. Croix Avid X. It used to be a 6.8 medium fast, but it is now more of a 6.6, 6.7 medium fast because I broke the tip and then repaired it. So this rod still has some utility for me, and it's got a little bit more backbone because it's a little shorter and it's a little on the heavier side down towards the bottom. So this is what I use to throw like jerk shads, Vision 110s. I pretty much always have braid to leader on this, but the reel again is also pretty important because as you saw there, that fish just darted right at me. This is a 6-to-2-to-1 Pissy Fun Carbon X reel. This is one of my favorite reels. It's only like 60 bucks on Amazon, but this setup covers so many bases for me. So I can throw the hard jerk bait, I can throw the soft jerk bait, I can throw something light and classic like a rooster tail. I can throw the Collin Special or a Ned rig on this, but you can also throw crankbaits on this. You could throw lighter poppers. You could cover lots of bases with this, and it is a medium fast, and because it's a little shorter though, it's got a little more backbone, but it still has a nice parabolic bend for keeping treble hooks pegged, but it is also good at setting single hooks, especially with a braid to leader line where there's not a lot of stretch between the reel and the fish. Another thing that I really like about this combo is that it's a little on the shorter side. And if you're a kayak fisherman, you know that things happen out on the river. Sometimes it's easier to have a much shorter rod to be able to put down in the kayak, to be able to throw behind you, but it also helps you in just making more accurate casts as you're floating down the river where you maybe only have a shot or two. A shorter rod is just easier to handle and it just kind of stays out of the way a little bit. So I like to have a shorter option for me, but I also like to have a spinning rod that has a little bit more backbone, but still has a nice bend, which gives me a little bit more flexibility in what I throw. Now, at certain times of the year, when I know fish are gonna be positioned on the upside of laydowns and I'm gonna be floating down to them and I wanna pull them out from the laydown, I'm gonna opt for a little heavier rod. I like a medium heavy fast in that situation. If you've watched this channel for any length of time, you know I have a 6.6 G Loomis for that purpose entirely. It's not a rod that I need to impart a lot of action on the bait with. Instead, it's a rod that I need to horse big smallmouth out of trees in the fall time when they're on the upside, because where do they want to go as soon as you get them hooked? Straight back into the nastiest part of the tree. And having a little bit of a heavier rod helps me do that. This rod can do it, but man, it can be some work horsing a big smallmouth upstream against the current and out of wood. So this one here I really do like. I'm not big on recommending brands or anything, so I'm just gonna say get something in the 6.6 to 6.8 range that you feel comfortable with. I like a medium fast. If you want like a medium heavy, fast, moderate, something like that that is a little more bend but still has the good backbone, that is also something that I really recommend. This is a rod that I take with me. If I have no idea what the river is gonna be like, this is one that is coming with me on the kayak every single time. So just to recap here today for you guys, the 4 setups I am bringing pretty much everywhere I go, no matter where I am in the country, no matter what time of year, are gonna be 2 spinning setups, 2 casting setups, 1 6'10" medium fast, 1 a little shorter medium fast, so this could be a 6.6 to 6.8, and then sometimes I will swap that for a 6.6 medium heavy fast. And then as far as my casting setups go, I want one that's a little softer and one that's a little harder. I like them both about the same length, right around 7 foot, maybe one a little shorter, maybe one a little longer, depending on what I'm doing, but for the most part, those actions are gonna be what I'm sticking with. One of those setups is gonna have a little faster reel, one in the 8-to-1 gear ratio range, and then the other is gonna be just a little slower in the 7-to-1 gear ratio range. And I do honestly think with those 4 setups, you can cover a lot of bases out on the river. I think you can get away with a lot of different bait choices for those setups, and you're not gonna be kicking yourself if you wanna throw something else. The great thing about those 4 setups is they allow for a lot of adaptability, so when you need to cut something off and tie something new on that's either a little lighter, a little heavier, single hook, treble hook, you've got your bases covered and you can go out there and smash them wherever you are.